these values, they live at the intersection of three different disciplines: social science, sociology, neuroscience, and psychology. All three of these disciplines agree that values determine our behavior. Let's talk about the neuroscientists. They will tell you that the prefrontal cortex of your brain is the CEO of your brain and that nothing happens in your body. You don't do anything or think anything until the CEO tells you that that's what you're going to do. And the CEO uses one thing to determine how it's going to react to any inputs coming into your system, and that's your values.
Aloha and welcome to another episode of the Groundswell Marketing Podcast, where I connect you to outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin of Groundswell Marketing, and today we've got an incredible guest named David Allison. He's a human behavior expert and values thinking pioneer. He's also a best-selling author and international speaker. He's been an advisor to so many different industry sectors and disciplines. He's got a huge background in agency marketing background. We kind of delve into that a little bit, but he's got this incredible research that helps organizations all over the world engage and influence their target audiences in a really powerful way, and it's based on this Valuegraphics database that he's built. It's the first global record of what we all care about, created from over 500,000 surveys in 152 languages in 180 countries. So Valuegraphics, he'll kind of dive into what it measures and how everyone on earth should really care about this, especially if you're in marketing. And we do a real deep dive on its impacts for businesses going forward. So without further ado, let's paddle in. All right, we're in the Groundswell studios, and today I have the one and only David Allison. Welcome to the show, buddy.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet, and I'm super pumped because this is going to be a really exciting episode. We literally just got into it for about 3 minutes, and I didn't hit record. So we're going to start back exactly where we were because you were on an absolute roll describing the reason that I connected with you. And the reason is I identified that you're the founder of the Valuegraphics Database, and you had a social media post that was fairly cheeky, and it was basically saying that you had discovered a way to target people that makes everything else like snake oil salesmen that are trying to peddle demographics. And it really caught my attention. You were talking about how and why you came up with that post. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, I think the exact post you're referring to said, anybody who tries to tell you anything about generations as a marketing segment is peddling snake oil. And so I will answer your question, but we're going to talk here for a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is I want to just establish the basis for that statement and everything else I'm about to say. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my research. I'm going to just talk about this once, and then we won't have to talk about it anymore. But I just want everybody to understand how serious this body of work has been. So it's taken us 5 years. We've collected 500,000 surveys, 500,000 surveys from around the world. We've measured 436 different metrics. What people value primarily is what we've been focused on, but also their wants and needs and expectations. So values, wants, needs, and expectations, 436 metrics. It's 180 countries that we're accurate in now, with 152 different languages we've had to use. It has a plus or minus 3.5% level of accuracy and a 95% level of confidence, all of which is to say, this is the first and most accurate record of what everyone on the planet actually cares about and who they are as humans. So now we could do a couple things with this. To answer your question, the first thing we did with this when we finished collecting all of this information was we started looking at demographic labels, saying, let's look at age categories, let's look at income, gender, marital status, number of kids, occupation, all of those things that we use as marketers to try and understand our target audiences so that we can influence them, we can engage with them, and we can influence their behaviors. So how accurate are these tools as a way to understand people? So we went into the database to find out. So if we take baby boomers as an example, everybody's favorite target audience for the last 20 years because they have all the money, and say, how often around the world, 500,000 surveys, do baby boomers agree with each other on anything? In other words, how similar are they? Baby boomers only agree with each other 13% of the time, 1-3. And that means that if you spend $1 targeting baby boomers and you do everything perfectly, you're going to get at best a 13% ROI on that dollar. And that's if you do everything perfectly, which you probably won't because you're human. So let's say you get 10%. Let's say 10% ROI in that buck. That's not really good. Well, it's about to get worse because here's the other thing that we found out. Around the world, regardless of what demographic category you fit into, just because you're human, alive, and breathing, we all agree with each other about 8% of the time. So that's the table stakes. You get 8% for free. So now we go back to those boomers. You managed to get a 10% return on investment on your dollar. You really got 2% better than if you'd just done whatever the hell you wanted and not even bothered targeting anybody. Those same numbers hold true for millennials, Generation X, men, women, people who are earn $50,000 a year, people who earn $100,000 a year, married, single, divorced, number of children. None of those categories, they're all similar. So you take a whole bunch of those and you put them together and you get something like this. 18 to 24-year-old men who earn $50,000 a year and have an undergraduate degree and are in a white-collar profession and are single. That's a pretty standard description for a target audience. And from there, we go ahead and we start spending money and trying to get them to do stuff. But when you look at that data, what you've done by making that description is you've added up a whole bunch of zeros. These are all different categories that mean nothing. And piling one category that means nothing on top of another category that means nothing does not equal something. You just have a whole bunch of nothing. And then you start throwing your clients' money at it. It's an incredibly flawed system for understanding audiences, groups of people, and what makes them do the things they do.
So take us back a little bit. How did you come to figuring this out, or what was the discovery? What was the moment or disruption that led to this? There must be a little bit more of a background story, because when you and I did a quick chat before the show earlier in the week or last week, and you go way back in the advertising marketing industry. Could you kind of walk us through just a little bit of like what's led to this?
Sure. I went to school back when we had ad agencies that were a thing. They actually called them advertising agencies. And I wanted more than anything to work in one. So I got a journalism degree because I wanted to be a copywriter. And I also did a degree that was sort of partially through the School of Journalism, partly through the School of Business, because I thought I'd be a copywriter or maybe an account guy. I've been watching too many movies, precursors and TV shows before Mad Men came along that made that whole industry seem really cool and fun. And so I worked in that industry for a long, long time. And then I ended up owning my own firm in that business. And then recently, 5 years ago, I sold it. So I grew up understanding how to target an audience. And I've been in boardroom after boardroom after boardroom where somebody had handed me a demographic description of their target audience that they'd worked up or asked me to work one up. Sometimes there was some surveys they'd done to find out that indeed they are talking to 18 to 24-year-old men who earn $50,000 a year and have an undergraduate degree. Great. So we know that is true. And maybe they'd compared that with their customer, their CRM system, and they knew that these people, when they came to their establishment, they tended to spend X number of dollars and they came every 6 months. So that's interesting, some psychographic information about them as well. And then we'd go back to the agency and we'd make stuff up. And we go, well, okay, these guys, well, they're all going to be into Beyonce because that's what those people like. And they're all going to like blue because they're men and they're young men. So they like technology. And so we just start making stuff up. And then we go back to the client and we'd say, here's what we got. This amazing idea. Here's this campaign we're going to do for you. It's going to be fantastic. And, sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. The most telling example I have of this is when I finally ended up having my own firm. We specialized in real estate development. Now, the stakes are really high all of a sudden, because when somebody gives you a brief about who the customer is going to be and the unit price of the stuff that you're trying to sell starts at about $1 million and goes up from there, and they're going to throw $400 million on the table to build this product, and they're counting on you to bring the right people to buy these $1 million units. Same process. We'd have a demographic description, some past buyer behavior, and we go and start making stuff up. And you know what? In most markets, until, certain ups and downs in the real estate market, but we'd sell out. And then a couple of years later, you'd go and you watch the people show up at the ribbon cutting and the door opening, and here you are. You get to actually see who you attracted with all that effort. And there wasn't a single person in the room who matched the description that we thought of who was coming. We'd been spending all this time and money talking to a bunch of people who never showed up. So what was going on? That's sort of where it started. When I sold my firm, I decided I was going to see if I couldn't figure this out. So we started doing some research about condos, because that's what my firm was all about. And we were trying to figure out what it is that makes people want to live in one building over another. And our theory, because it's what holds true in that whole industry, is that it had something to do with demographics. Because we build a building for baby boomers and another one for Generation X, another one for first-time home buyers and singles. And that's how we market them and sell them. Well, the data started coming back after 7,000 surveys that nobody wanted to live in a building full of people the same age as they were. They called it a ghetto. And they also said, now remember, we're talking about housing, the most expensive thing that anyone will put any of their budget towards. They said that they would spend 15% more than market value for a condo or an apartment, as long as they just knew one thing. And that one thing was they wanted to live in a building full of people who were just like them. They wanted to live in a building full of people who shared their outlook on life. They had all kinds of ways of saying it, but what they were saying was, I want to be around people who have the same values that I do. So that was the light bulb moment for sure. And we sat back and went, well, why would this just be condos? Why wouldn't this be vacations and banks and pens and lamps and desks and shirts and everything? So we started going really heavy on the surveys. We ended up collecting enough data to statistically prove that values, putting people in tribes or in groups, audiences, based on what they care about, is a far more powerful way to understand audience behavior than putting them in groups based on old-fashioned categories like whether they're men or women or rich or poor. Technology has made it possible for us to not have to behave in a demographically appropriate way. You don't have to do something by the time you're 24. There was a time when a young woman or young man who by the time they were 24 or even 18 hadn't certain things hadn't happened in their life, there was something wrong with you. There was social pressure to behave, conform to your demographics, but we don't have to do that anymore. But we still use that system as if it worked. So we've got a better system now. We can put people into groups. We can profile an audience of people. And we can say, what do these folks all care about in common? What are the 2 or 3 things they share? And so it all becomes about their values. So that's kind of where it started. It's where we got to. Over the course of time, we found more and more evidence that we're on the right path. I'm going to keep on this ramble because I have one more thing I want to get out here. Then I'm going to let you actually ask another question. It's that these values, they live at the intersection of 3 different disciplines: social science, sociology, neuroscience, and psychology. All 3 of these disciplines agree that values determine our behavior. Let's talk about the neuroscientists. They will tell you that the prefrontal cortex of your brain is the CEO of your brain and that nothing happens in your body. You don't do anything or think anything until the CEO tells you that that's what you're going to do. And the CEO uses one thing to determine how it's going to react to any inputs coming into your system, and that's your values. So tick, there's neuroscience. Let's move on to psychology. When you use research, when you're doing research in the world of psychology, one of the things they always warn you to watch for in your research studies and methodology is confirmation bias, which is the human tendency to agree with stuff that you already agree with. We always like to find more about the stuff that we already think is right. So what if you could flip that around? Instead of it being a bad thing, it was a good thing. And you said, you know what? Why don't we find out what people think is right, what they're looking for, and use that as a way to talk to them and say, hey, you want some confirmation bias? Here's a big heap and helping of it right here. And then finally, social science. We know from decades of study in sociology that if a crowd of people do something, you can look at them and go, well, I wonder why they all went and did that thing. And there's all kinds of research tools you can use to determine what the common values they had that made them go and do that. Maybe the most famous example of that is smoking. We all kind of quit smoking after decades and decades of being told how bad it was for us. There was a moment the sociologists will point to and say, this is when the tide turned. And it was because our values were being threatened when we were suddenly not allowed to smoke inside anymore. You had to leave your friends. You had to leave your coworkers, leave the family dinner. You had to leave those things that you valued and go outside and be an outsider. That's when we all started chewing Nicorette and putting patches on because our values were threatened. So, long story short, values determine everything we do. And now we have a data set that's been built that'll help us understand what the shared values of any group of people anywhere on the planet, what those values are. So we can use those as the buttons you need to push to engage and influence their behavior.
That's interesting. So the example you gave of smoking, it almost made me think that they started smoking because they wanted to be outsiders. Isn't that usually how smokers started? Like it was like being a badass?
Well, if you go back in the history of smoking, it was glamorous. It was for rich and glamorous people. You look at movies from the 40s, black and white movies from the 40s and the 50s, and everybody's smoking. Every scene, somebody's lighting up.
I guess I'm talking about the more modern use of it. Like you started smoking in this modern era of, I'm a badass and then, and I'm an outsider. And then you end up being an outsider and you're going, I don't want to do this anymore. I thought that was sort of ironic.
That's definitely been a path for many people as well. But as their outsider buddies all started quitting, suddenly they were the last one left, and they couldn't even be with their buddies anymore who were outsiders because they weren't allowed to smoke near them. Yeah,
they valued the relationship. So what struck me about what you said and our connection was I've always thought this. I've always thought that it was more important to there was some sort of connective tissue, like what we value or what we care about or our tribe or whatever. And the reason why was because I was, I've always snowboarded my life and surfed. And I noticed that at snowboard shops that I was filming heli skiing stuff. I was like 40, 42, 45. And I was hanging out with these kids that were 16. And there's everything in between, new dads and stuff. And I was like, how do you as a store go, hey, demographics, this is who's in the store. When you look at clearly at any moment in time, it transcended any amount of generations, like clearly. And there was something for everyone. Right?
Oh, I know. It's like
and myself, like I don't act my age. Like I still skateboard in the mailbox for fuck's sakes. Yeah. Like I actually had about 5 years ago, I've lived in the home I'm in for 15 years now. And I think that it was about 10 years. I raised 2 kids here as a single dad. And my neighbor, who's an elusive individual, I rarely saw him. And one day I'd skateboarded from the mailbox, wearing shorts, flip-flops, and my hat backwards. And he was watering the lawn. And I went, hey. And he said hi to me. He goes, hey, I see you here sometimes. He's like, I don't see your parents very much. I'm like, are you kidding me, dude? Like, look at me. I'm like, I'm bald. Like, I'm like, and I just like, it just sort of struck me that, people have a lot of assumptions, including marketing and advertising, and they get lucky, like you mentioned, and sometimes they don't. But to me, the continuity that I like about this is that we galvanize ourselves with people who share our values. We get married to people who share our values. That connective tissue probably allows for a much better marketing and more healthy way.
Oh, for sure. It's difficult, though, because our species has survived based on some basics of heuristics where we judge danger or friends or people that we want to do we run away or do we go towards things based on making snap judgments that are from all about outward appearances? So we see, three tough guys coming towards us on the street late at night, and it's dark and you're in a bad part of town, and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get beaten up here. I better run. They could be three social workers from the local university out handing out sandwiches and blankets to homeless people. You have no idea, but our brains go, get out of here, get out of here. Because we've been conditioned to make snap judgments about people based on external characteristics. It's a fact.
Wasn't that the survival instinct?
Absolutely. It was. It was to make sure that we survived and that we didn't make the wrong decisions when we were faced with things. But we don't have to live like that anymore. But what trying to get people to understand that that's the case, it does take a whole lot of these kinds of conversations and these sorts of light bulb moments like you had at the skate shop or the surf shop, where you look around and go, I have so much in common with these people and I have nothing in common with them from an outward appearance perspective. Who we are is similar. What we are is absolutely all over the map. And that's the big difference. We've been using demographics as a way to understand what people are, and that's fine. We still have to do that. I go back to my condo days and say, if we're going to build a penthouse condominium for $5 million, I can pretty much guarantee it won't be an 18-year-old woman who works at a grocery store and doesn't have a high school education who's going to buy that thing. Still important to know what your demographics are. Those are the whats of your demographics. But who people are, the people that once you've determined who's going to buy that $3 million condo, what the pool of people might be, you can define them demographically. But don't make assumptions that just because they're similar on the outside, that they're similar on the inside. That's where we've been making these mistakes. We need to understand who people are, not what they are.
So tell us a little bit more about how a business should go about identifying that.
Yeah, so we've come up with a process. I call it the values thinking process, or values thinking. And I'm kind of piggybacking on design thinking. This is a decision-making process that anyone can use. You don't need to hire me. You don't need to use my data. But I do think, I'm going to go out on a limb and when I say it's not I think, I know everyone needs to start using values thinking as a way to understand the audiences that they're trying to engage and influence. So here's how it goes. First thing you need to do is understand the question. What is it you want to know the answer to? What are you trying to get somebody to do? That's pretty easy. Put it in some context, understand how you got where you are, what's making this question happen right now, why is this of concern, where do you think it might go tomorrow if you don't do anything about it, all that kind of good stuff. And then you need to understand what these folks are, who these people that you're talking to. Does it matter if, sometimes it does matter if they're male or female. I mean, there's certain products out there that are only for men and certain products that are only for women. And there's, not a lot of 18-year-olds buying condominiums. So sometimes age and other sorts of demographic characteristics are relevant. I think our problem with this piece of the puzzle is we've been collecting far too much irrelevant data that has nothing to do with the question that we're trying to solve. So only worry about the stuff that's actually relevant to the particular question. So first we identify the question, then we figure out what these people are all about from an outward appearance perspective. And then we do the step that we forget, which is, who are these people? What are their values? How do they make decisions about everything? And now there's 3 ways to do that. The first way is to just start asking smarter questions. Whenever you do a survey, whenever you poll your customers, even if you're a frontline salesperson in a shoe store, let's say, every time somebody comes into the shoe store, ask some questions about what they care about. Not about shoes, but just about life. Right now, we have this amazing thing going on. One of the best parts of all these Zoom meetings is that the first thing everyone does on Zoom is say, how are you? What's going on in your world? And people are introducing me to their dog, and they're telling me about their kids, and they're telling me how much they miss their friends at the gym. I'm finding out what people actually care about before we even start talking about business. So the first way you can figure out the values of the people you want to influence is to just ask them. The second way costs about $16. And that's about buying a copy of my book. And I always sound like I'm pimping my book when I do this, but for $16, which by the way, I make a buck on. So everybody listening to this would have to buy 20 copies. I might have enough for a bottle of wine. But in the book, there's a little quiz, 10 questions. Administer that 10-question quiz to whatever audience you want through whatever tool you want, SurveyMonkey, whatever it is. And it'll tell you, the answers will tell you which of the 10 chapters in the book is the most alike your target audience. So we've taken all of this data we've collected, we've managed to put it into 10 big giant archetypes. So that quiz will tell you which of the archetypes is the one you should be paying attention to. So it's pretty inaccurate. It's only 1 out of 10. There's potentially hundreds of thousands of different profiles in the data set. But for the cost of a book, you can find out which of the top 10 is the most important to you. And in that chapter, I tell you everything we know about that audience, about how to push their buttons, what it is they'll respond to, how you can identify them, what they like, what they don't like. It's all there for you. And then the third way you can figure out the values of your audience is, of course, hire me and we'll do a big, expensive study for you and tell you all kinds of really, really precise things about your audience. But you don't need that. The point of this whole rant is just ask the smart questions. If you want to buy a book, that's cool. There's a 10-question quiz in there. Now we go back to the fourth step in the values thinking process, which is to just figure out, based on that question that you identified, the description you have of this audience. Now you know what it is they're going to use to make a decision because you know what their values are. Well, now you just do your brainstorming. You go, okay, well, what are the possible solutions? They have to track back against those values and those characteristics and that particular question. But let's put some stuff on paper. Let's pick one. Let's execute. Let's measure it and come back to the front of the process again. So a simple 4-step values thinking process. If I could get the world to start using that as a way to make decisions, we'd end up removing so much of the divisiveness that's inherent in our current system. Demographics are inherently a discriminatory and divisive mechanism. If you think about how everything begins with a discussion of the demographic profile of the thing we're making, the campaign we're launching, the idea we're generating, and demographics force us to think in terms of us versus them. It's men versus women, rich versus poor, young versus old. It's no wonder our world is all having a fight with each other all the time. It's baked right into our DNA to push each other into categories based on things that make us different from each other instead of using our shared common human values, the things we agree on, the things we think are the most important. Imagine if everything in the world began with that conversation. What are these people we're going to do this thing for? What do they all care about? I think we'd end up with a much better, happier, less divisive world.
Okay, cool. Lots to unpack there. So on a quick point form, what were the 4 steps?
The 4 steps are identify your question, figure out what these people are, figure out who they are, in other words, their values, and then figure out the how. What am I going to do for that question with these people, knowing how they make their decisions?
Okay. So one of the questions I have is when you're asking questions, people have different values for different things. Like in your business, trying to connect with an audience, how do you know what values are actually important to the business? Like, do you know what I mean? Like there's more, like we have several values about different things. I may value my children, but I also value environmentalism. Do I have to have a checkbox of all the things I value or prioritize them? Or how do I go about the ones that would matter?
I think if I can paraphrase your question, what you're asking me is if I'm finding out what my audience, my customers value, how do I know which of those values are the most important for my particular business?
Correct.
Okay. If you're going to use that system of just asking questions, what you're going to find are the things that are most important to people regardless. If somebody consistently comes into your store or talks to your customer service team or responds to a survey and you find out over and over and over again that their family is the first thing they want to talk about, well, family is clearly their most important value. Now, you're going to try and sell them a pair of socks. You've invented the best new crazy socks. They've got built in their wearable technology. They're made out of bamboo. They're recyclable, and you can, I don't know, whatever. They're the most amazing socks ever on the face of the earth. Well, you want to talk to them about those socks, not about anything that I just said. They don't care that they're recyclable. They don't care they have technology, and then they don't care that they're most amazing socks in the world. What they care about is their family. How can you talk to them about your socks in a way that they go, oh, I see why this would be smart for my family? That's what you have to do. So in the absence of it being a precise measure, which is what our data set can do if you want to make that investment, or what the book can do if you want to take that 10-question quiz, you get a little bit better that way. If you're just going to ask people questions, you're going to find out the one or two things that are most important to them. Here's the crux, though. If you don't ask those questions, you're going to be trying to sell them socks based on what you think is cool. You're going to go, well, these are amazing socks. They've got technology in them, and they're recyclable, and they're made out of bamboo, and they're best socks in the history of the world. And people will be like, meh, whatever. Doesn't have anything to do with my family, so I don't care. You're missing the entire boat. So even if just all you know is their number one value is family, and you can find a way to connect your story, your product, your offering, your brand somehow to enhancing the value they place on their family, you're going to be great. So, I mean, in its simplest form, these socks come in a family pack. I mean, there's the simplest, easiest way to answer that question.
So is this different than what human needs? Like I want to be safe, secure, connection, all the basic human needs.
There's a lot of confusion around these various things. The World Values Index lists 40 different core human values. Everything, we have 56 because as far as we know, we've built the first global data set. So while doing that, we found some extra ones that the rest of the folks in our line of work haven't found yet. So we have 56 values we use as our baseline. Values are things that you can't ask any more why questions about. So family is that's about as deep as it gets. Like if you care about your family, there's no why, you just do. Everything else, though, wants, needs, expectations, beliefs, emotions, they all come from a value. You may be really happy today because something cool happened for your family. You may be really sad today because something terrible happened for your family. You aren't just happy or sad. You're happy or sad because something has gone on with one of your values. I have a real hard time when I see different people out there who are touting the benefits of using emotion-based profiling for products or audiences, because your emotions change every 20 minutes. They're all about whether or not your values are being satisfied or not. I mean, I've had relationships with companies and brands that are amazing, and then one bad phone call with a customer service guy, and suddenly my emotions swing off the chart in the other direction. I never want to go into that place again or talk to those people. I'm totally off that brand. But my values have stayed the same throughout that entire process. So values are forever. All that other stuff is all manifestations of what you care about. People are talking about it right now as it relates to COVID and this lockdown period that we've all been living through. And asking if values have changed. Well, they haven't. What happens during times of anxiety and fear is we double down on our values. So I'll go back to family again. If family is something that you have always valued, you're going to be very focused on your family right now, and perhaps even more focused than you've ever been before. But if family was not something that you valued before COVID, you didn't suddenly get all worried about your family. You don't get to grow new ones. You don't get to chuck values because something else has happened in your life. They're yours forever. How you react and how the behaviors manifest from those values, those will change over the course of time. But the values themselves are bedrock. Does that answer your question?
So,
I think
it did. It's like what I find really interesting about this is the application of it. Like I get the theory of it because I do agree with it. And that's what got me right away. I'm just going like, how does a business apply? Like I understand your question matrix that you gave of the different components, and I'm just trying to see through how, like, sometimes people don't know what they value. Like they're not clear in their own mind. They just subconsciously, they know they value it. And so I know that in a research setting with the right questions, and that's why you've got the database, you're able to pull that out. But I'm just like, how do you like I'm just kind of trying to think of like trying to target somebody, like someone I knew as a friend, and using that same methodology you gave, and they care about family and selling socks, they'd be like, I just want to buy a pair of socks. It makes no difference that has anything connected to do with my family. In that moment, they maybe value price sensitivity or something. But in that moment, right? So I'm just trying to see where all those values all line up for a business to make a good decision.
So let's talk about those socks some more. And your friend, who's a family man. So he's looking at 3 or 4 different packages of socks. And they all have similar characteristics. One of them's all excited about their technology. One of them says they're made out of, cotton that's sustainably farmed and fair trade prices with cotton farmers. And then the other one is in a family package, and there's socks that are labeled mom, dad, and kid. They're actually sewn into the toes. Everything else is the same. They all have the same features, characteristics. They all have the same price point. Of course, the person who, whether he knows he's doing this or not, if he has family as a value, is going to gravitate towards the one that has a family value being reflected back at him. It's what he's looking for. He's out there in the world trying to get confirmation bias. He wants to find stuff that reassures him that the things he thinks are important are indeed important. So he will make a decision to buy twice as many socks if it's the right kind of sock that's going to make him feel like his values are in alignment with the outside world. I'll give you an example from some work that we've done for a client. I always have to be careful how I talk about stuff because I can't really, clients pay for research, it's their research. But in a general sense, I'll tell you about, we'll talk about cannabis. Cannabis is an interesting product category here in Canada because it's recently been, not that recent anymore, but it wasn't that long ago when it was legalized across the country. And suddenly there was this huge rush of people trying to understand how to get people to buy their cannabis products. So we were asked to figure out who are the new cannabis users, the ones who wouldn't use it when it was illegal, but now that it's legal are suddenly like, cool, cannabis, I'm all about cannabis. So we found one segment of the market that we call the cannabis healthy health nuts. It's a kind of kooky little name we made up for them. And the cannabis healthy health nuts, here's what we know. They have nothing wrong with them. They have no glaucoma, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, none of the stuff that normal people that you would normally feel like you need to take cannabis for from a health perspective. They just see cannabis as like another vitamin. It's a thing they want in their system, like a multivitamin. So 2 of the values we know that this particular segment has, there's 4 or 5 they have in common, but the 2 I'm going to talk about right now are family and health and well-being and family. So my client wanted to figure out how to sell these folks their cannabis product. And so what we advised and what they, I believe, ended up doing, I'm not going to tell you, I got to couch my words. What they ended up doing was creating think of it as a vitamin. So it came in a bottle that looked like a vitamin would look. It had labels on it that made it very clear that this had been approved by the FDA, and it was in measured doses, and it felt like it came from a lab with people in scientific lab coats and all that kind of stuff. It arrived on a subscription basis, so it showed up at the house once a month. When you ran out, they kind of kept track of that, and they subscribed. They would send you your new vitamin C, if you will. And the bottle was very unattractive. It was not gummy bears. It was hard to get into the bottle. And the packaging for mailing was ripstop nylon that you couldn't really just figure your way into by accident. All of that was underlined by very bold text throughout in all of their marketing and promotional materials that we're doing all this because we don't want your kids to accidentally think that this is candy and get into here and start eating this stuff, because it's not. It's just a vitamin, but it's just a vitamin for you. They had no intention of taking this vitamin with their friends. It wasn't a recreational product. There was no need to make it sound like it was going to be a lot of fun. They wanted it because they have health and family as 2 of their values. So we treated it like a health product and we protected their family. So there's an example of a product that was designed from the ground up to meet the needs, to meet the values of a particular segment of the population.
I like it. Now, have you ever heard of the word newsjacking before?
Yeah.
David Miriam Scott, where it's like there's a trend, something that's trending on news, and you insert yourself in it because you're almost like guaranteed to go with the tide, if you will. So what I was thinking, that was the growth marketer in me and stuff. I was thinking, success always leaves its clues. Is there a way to look at buyer behavior based on value, so collective values, that you could look for so that it already gave you a hat tip to this tribe or this group, the common values, so that you didn't have to do the interviews. You didn't have to do that process. You could just go, oh, they collectively have this existing value. An example might be, we'll say a Methodist church or something, you kind of have an idea that they all have a shared value of some kind. Is that possible, or am I just totally like leaping?
I think what you're asking is if certain clues exist that would help you understand a more robust values profile. If A is present, therefore B and C and D probably are present too.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, like think of it like, you're looking at like collaborative filtering, like buyer behavior that's common, and they have all these attributes and therefore recommend this, right? So you're using pattern matching and you're but you're doing it from a some sort of like this group of people that have self-identified in some other situation, could be voting, could be church, could be, snowboarding, surfing, whatever, and then apply the same kind of thinking. Or is that just not work?
Well, you see, the difference is values are predictive and can help you understand how to change behaviors tomorrow. So any measure of current behavior or current activity, for example, there's firms that say that they'll go and scrape the social net for you and find out what people are saying about your company right now. Cool. But that's historical. Like the moment you say it out loud and write it down, it's historical data. What values tell you is how you can get people to change their behavior tomorrow, because you know what they're looking for. You know what they're listening for. Listen, when I'm on stage, one of the stories I like to tell is I'll pick on somebody in the front row. So if we ever get back to public speaking again and you're sitting in the front row, be warned, if you're wearing a bright color, I'll pick on you. So it's generally, I'll pick on somebody in the front row, let's say a lady in a red sweater. And I'll say, you in the red sweater, I can tell you drink 3 cups of coffee a day. Am I right? And they'll go, oh, more or less, whatever. Say, cool. And obviously you're a beautiful woman. You're a female. And I'm going to guess you're 25 years old, even though she looks much older, and get another laugh out of the audience for that. So I'm stereotyping her. I'm giving her some demographic and psychographic qualities. And then my point is, none of that information tells me if I can get you to drink more coffee tomorrow, switch brands of coffee, change your caffeine intake mechanism to Red Bull, abandon caffeine, or maybe try tea. I don't know any of that based on all kinds of data I know about you right now. The only way I'm going to know how to make you do something other than what you're already doing is if I understand what you care about more than anything in the world. If you care about the environment more than anything in the world, then I can talk to you about this new kind of coffee that's the most environmentally responsible coffee on the planet, and you'll probably start drinking that coffee.
So it's what people care about the most.
It's another alternate definition for values. What you value and what you care about the most, those are your values. Whatever you care about the most are your values.
That's amazing. So it makes tons of sense, because the traditional way that, I guess we both have grown up in marketing and in the agency business is you're right. It feels like it's hit or miss, and you know full well that there's they now call it creating multiple personas, right?
Yeah.
So that they can get a broader spectrum to take into account for the outliers and so forth. But the common denominator, is it possible that you could have people who value different things and be targeting different values, that they don't? There's like groups within your customer base that do not value the same thing.
Oh, of course. I talk about it like a loaf of bread. we've been slicing this loaf of bread the same way forever. We try and figure out what our audience is by slicing up the bread and going, I want this slice, this slice. I want men. I want them to be 18 to 24. I want them to be this and this and this. But if you slice the bread the other way, you will find a group of values that goes across all of those bread slices, regardless of whether you're talking about men, women, rich, poor, young, old, educated, uneducated. There will be values that cross all the way across that loaf of bread. And in fact, what we find consistently, that loaf of bread is actually a baguette, that you've got a much broader audience if you focus on a values-based definition of the audience, because it has nothing to do with demographics. It has nothing to do with how old you are or how rich you are or whether you are male or female. It has everything to do with putting people into groups based on what they care about in common. That's it. It's that simple. Now, the psychologists have had it simple for a long time. I don't mean to offend anybody who's listening who's a psychologist, but they can work with somebody one-on-one. Psychology is the study of human behavior individually. So they give someone an MMPI test or a Myers-Briggs inventory, and they can go, oh, I see what these people value. And then what they do is they work with that person in a clinical setting to see if they can't get their real world to line up with their inner values, their core values. And that is what makes somebody happy. We all want to be aligned with our values. We want our lives to be aligned with our values. That's our goal in life. What we've been missing in the social sciences, in the sociological world, which is the study of masses of people at one time, is enough data to do that same thing. To be able to say this entire group of people, here are their values. Now, if we're going to try and get them to change behaviors, we need to find a way to make our offering aligned with what they already believe to be true. Think of them as all standing around a campfire. They're all standing around a fire of values. They're all burning this fuel that's based on the things that they think are important. And if you bring them some information that's going to add to that fire and make the fire burn brighter, then you're going to get invited to stand around the circle and roast some marshmallows and talk to them for a little while. But if you try and get them to leave that fire and go and pay attention to something else that they're not already interested in, you want them to come over to your fire for a little while because you just invented a pair of socks that has some kooky technology, they're not interested. They're interested in what they're interested in. So if you want to get their interest, you got to go be interested in what they're interested in too.
Right. That's about connection. That's when I could totally see how like marketing copy is, and I guess you could say sort of the programs to connect with them have, you see, sometimes you see campaigns and you just connect with it. Right. And you just go, yeah, they just totally get me. I think that's what you're talking about, is like when you just kind of feel like you said, like they're in my group and they're not trying to pull me away this and the other direction. They're like, no, you're thinking the same thing I am, sort of thing, right? Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, this isn't a new idea. Seth Godin has a famous line: "People like us do things like this." That's basically all we've done, is build an empirical data set to support that notion. And Simon Sinek runs around going, "Ask everybody what their why is." Well, we can pinpoint that for entire groups of people now and tell you what their why is. And once you know what their why is, you're able to influence them, engage with them, get their attention, make friends with them, whatever it is you're setting out to do.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think that's so just talking about, I'm writing a book called Groundswell, and I believe that that's the very beginning of creating a groundswell, is creating a group of individuals that share the same values or their same why, that want to move in the same direction. And they have the desire to see it grow.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying. Like, it's like, that's another value.
That is the values. I mean, whatever it is that those group of people are united around and that they all believe is important, the things they care about the most in their lives, those are their values. And if you can harness that, then yes, you can create a groundswell. Absolutely, you can.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because you and I were talking before, and I was working on a presidential campaign. I asked you, like, hey, this would be really powerful for like a political campaign. And you had some really good, really, I thought it was really profound in terms of, your vision for the use of this database and its impacts. I know we got, we're wrapping up the show a little bit. I just want to get maybe a deep dive a little bit on the possibilities of impact to the world in a positive way. I'm really impressed with, if you could share a little bit more about what your vision of that is.
Well, without trying to sound like I'm playing a violin for myself here, we got a really small team. In fact, you're talking to the whole team right now. There's a couple of people who help me on a contract basis. But this is 14-hour days, 7 days a week. And I'm not doing this because it can help corporations target their audiences so much more powerfully. That's the fuel that I need. I need corporations to hire me so that I can tell them how to spend their money so much more effectively and get so much better results from their target audience. Because I take that money and then we use it to help humanitarian organizations around the world change the behaviors of people that they need to change. And we do that for free. That's pro bono. We help them understand. I'll give one of my favorite examples is single-use plastics. We're throwing single-use plastics in the ocean at a rate of 1 dump truck a minute on this planet right now. A dump truck a minute. Now, I'm not saying that my data is going to change all of that, but I could tell all the organizations in the world who are working to try and get people to change their behavior around using single-use plastics. I know what messages are going to work best in different parts of the world. So all those organizations around the world, I could give them the data that would help them change that behavior even just a bit. If my database could be responsible for us to be reducing that by 10% over the next couple of years, I'd be thrilled. There's so many problems in this world that are about us not understanding each other properly and therefore not being able to help each other see that there's better ways to move, there's better ways to be, there's better ways to think and behave. And that's what this database is capable of doing. So it's a Robin Hood strategy. I'm taking money from corporations so that we can give this data away for free to global humanitarian organizations that are doing really important work in the world. I don't want to, you know what? I'm going to name drop. I was going to say I don't want to name drop, but we just had our first call with the United Nations the other day, talking about one of the really important programs that they're doing around the world to help eradicate malaria. Now, if my database can help with that, oh my gosh, these 14-hour days are worth it. They're worth it, and I'll keep doing it as long as I'm able to get out of bed and get in front of my computer and talk to gracious podcast hosts like you.
Thanks. Dude, this is such a big vision. What a great legacy, by the way. And I just love your vision for where this is all going. And I think even for businesses, the fact that you're going on people's values is changing maybe even the way a business looks at its the humans that spend money with them, as opposed to them as customer A with this demographic Y and does this. It just takes people into I think it makes people more human. Is that possible to say? Like, I actually think from a business standpoint that you can be more human in your marketing with this type of database.
For sure. I mean, let's take it even a step further out from there. Let's talk about companies. Let's talk about social organizations. Let's talk about associations. Let's talk about everyone on earth and everything we do as humans. If it could all be based on knowing what each other cares about, how could that be anything but good?
I think that's the perfect way to end the segment. I mean, you're right. I mean, that's what we're talking about right now is marketing for good.
Yeah, absolutely. I sure appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. And if anybody's interested in learning more, I push out as much data as I can on my website at valuegraphics.com. All kinds of free reports you can download there. And I'll put the book in the show notes and all of your contact information. So if people want to follow you, where do you want them to follow you on social? LinkedIn would be best. Just find me under David Allison as 2 L's and Allison on LinkedIn. But if I can have one last request, following me is great. Helping me get other people to understand how important values are to our future, to everything we do, is even more important. So follow me, don't follow me, but just talk about this with other people. Think about using demographic stereotypes. Think twice. Don't use them anymore. They're harmful, they're hurtful, they're divisive. And even if all you do is start thinking about audiences based on what they care about instead of whether they're men or women or rich or poor or young or old, that'll be amazing. So do that, and I'll be thrilled. I'll be so happy.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, empathy and I think this is coming to the surface, a little more mindful marketing where people are, where businesses and the marketing world are looking at really maybe even like thinking differently about the way to proceed as a business. And I think this is part of that story and a big part of it. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. That was another episode of the Groundswell Marketing Podcast. As usual, you can just please follow me at groundswell.fm. I have a mic there, so leave me a voicemail. Tell me what you think. Tell me your thoughts. And, until next time, thank you so much for listening in, and mahalo.